Well, take a day off and the Prime Minister steps down. That's what happened yesterday, and I'm quite certain that there's a direct connection to that. Somebody said to the Prime Minister, they said, Todd Veinotte is not in today. Today's the day to pull the pin. So he did. That's what happened, folks. If you want to know the reality, that's what happened. The Prime Minister's office was monitoring the show. They found out through a leak that I wasn't going to be sitting, that I wouldn't be in yesterday. And I'm not sure who the leak was. Possibly Vanessa Vandeness, whose birthday was yesterday, by the way. Wish her belated happy birthday when you call. There, the cat is out of the bag. She kept it a secret yesterday because I was not here. Again, things just went off the rails yesterday because I was not here. The Prime Minister stepped down. Well, he's not stepped down yet. He's sticking around until March 24th when Parliament reconvenes. And it'll be a pretty short-lived rise to the top for whomever replaces him, and this is going to be very interesting. But by the same token, I don't know. I just don't know what can be done to resurrect the Liberals at this time. I don't know who would want the job, because you're pretty much guaranteed to. Well, it's not guaranteed. Whoever wins the leadership of the Liberal Party will inherit a parliament which is going to defeat the government immediately, because it'll be require a throne speech, I do believe, and I'll ask Laurie Turnbull about all of this in a little bit. So it'll be defeated or whatever. There'll be a confidence motion, so they'll be defeated, and we'll be heading to the polls in April or whatever the timeline is. So I to me, I just can't imagine why anybody would want the gig at this point. And I look at these names of potential replacements: Melanie Joly, Anita Anand, and Dominic LeBlanc. Apparently, his name's in the mix now at this point. I mean, all of these names are, to me, they're non-starters, because they're just going to be linked directly with Justin Trudeau and the carbon tax, and it's just going to be so easy to create a counter narrative to any of these people. And Christy Clark, some might say, might be an alternative, former British Columbia premier, but she's learning to speak French. She's certainly not a francophone. And Western Canada, I don't see any traction there really at all. And Mark Carney, I can't imagine why Mark Carney would want it. And some would say that Trudeau should have stuck around and allowed himself to be defeated in the next election, and then let the Liberals rebuild from there. But of course, the Liberal caucus is in panic mode because they're basically running for their lives at this point and fearing for their jobs. And I've been told endlessly at the doors by their constituents and through emails or whatever that if Trudeau doesn't go there, then they have no hope of winning their seat, of even retaining their seat. So that perhaps isn't even on the table. That option wasn't on the table. Trudeau looked at this and probably said, "Well, I got to go," and basically he cited that as the reason why he's got to go. Because of internal fighting. He didn't phrase it that way, but that's basically what's going on within the Liberal caucus. By the way, I've reached out to a couple of Halifax area and one other Nova Scotian MP as well, Cody Blois, Darren Fisher, Daryl Sampson, because I would like to get somebody on from the Liberal caucus here in Nova Scotia to talk about this. Darren Fisher has declined. He's a cabinet minister, of course. And I've not heard back from Cody Blois or Daryl Sampson yet. But I will continue to try and get somebody on from the Liberal caucus to talk about all of this. And because there's so much to unpackage. So we'll talk about all of this with Laurie Turnbull later in the show. Dan had her on yesterday. Thanks to Dan, by the way, for sitting in yesterday. And I was off yesterday, as I talked about. The reason why the Prime Minister stepped down, because I was off. And yeah, I'll throw this open to you. I'll get your comments on this as well. What do you think of all of this? Do you think that this can resurrect in any way, shape, or form the Liberals? Do the Liberals have any chance? Because the message is basically, we need to defeat Pierre Poilievre. and it'll basically be fear-mongering against Poilievre. Not running on their own record. Besides, of course, they'll roll out dental care and pharmacare and child care. They'll say that those are the three things that they've achieved. They won't talk about immigration run absolutely off the rails, housing and a massive housing crisis, affordability crisis. They won't mention any of that stuff. They'll just say that Pierre Poilievre's worse. That's basically the message. But anyway, can any of this turn any of that messaging around? And look, maybe you think that there are legitimate issues and concerns with the alternative of Pierre Poilievre. Perhaps you might plug your nose and vote Liberal now that Trudeau's gone. Will this perhaps bring you back to the Liberal fold? And who do you think should be the leader? And did any of these names that are being floated out there excite you to perhaps get behind the Liberal brand once again? So lots and lots to get to. And also Donald Trump continues to taunt us about being the 51st state. And it's I used to say on and fairly recently on the show that he's not serious. But you never know with this guy. Maybe he is serious. Who knows? Maybe he actually thinks that he's that influential that he could entice us. And he's got Kevin O'Leary, of course, down there talking in his ear now as though he represents Canada. Mr. Wonderful. Anybody who calls himself Mr. Wonderful, I'm sorry, I don't know how you take that person seriously. I really don't. But Mr. Wonderful's in his ear saying that, yeah, you're onto something now potentially. Canadians would love to be the 51st state. Low taxation, whatever the sales pitch is. Anyway, how seriously should we take all of this? And, of course, what's happening in the U.S. January 20th? And with the government on the ropes here, Trudeau will be the prime minister at the time. Of course, as mentioned, he'll remain in power until the 24th of March. How might they deal with the threat of tariffs? And it looks like Trump could certainly follow through with that. So lots and lots to get to. I hope to hear from many of you later in the show when we open the phone lines between 11 and 12. As mentioned, I'd like to thank Vanessa Van Den Ness on the other side of the glass at the control boards, doing a fine job as always. All right. Joining me now for a chat, Christine Saulnier, Director at the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives-Nova Scotia. Christine, thanks for joining the show as always. We appreciate your time.
Good morning, Todd.
All right. So Nova Scotia's decision to start indexing income assistance is a positive step, but it isn't enough to lift people out of poverty. It says the head of a nonprofit that supplies 140 food banks in the province. When I read the story, I thought I'd reach out to you because this is something that you've talked a lot about, and the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives has done a lot of research on this over the past number of years, and there's no shortage of data, right?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, we just released the Child and Family Poverty Report Card, and obviously part of that discussion is how do we reduce poverty, and income assistance is certainly part of the solution. Well, part of the problem is the base amount. So how much is provided to families who are turning to government as last resort? You know, if you don't have access to EI and you're unemployed and you don't have the training and you can't find a job that pays enough, I mean, this is where you're turning. And so we've absolutely raised a red flag around income assistance. So, I mean, I agree with Avery, who said, you know, it's not enough. Inflation is only part of really what's facing these families. If you adjust to inflation, you're supporting not having the amount that's provided be eroded, really. So making sure that what you get is what you get, but it doesn't provide any increase over and above inflation. And I would say, you know, tagging people who are living in poverty, the support provided to them, to overall inflation is probably not the best measure. So in other words, where is most of your budget going? It's going to rent. And so rent currently, given the market and given the rent cap at 5%, you're allowing landlords to raise the rent 5%, but you're adjusting inflation for people living in poverty by 3.1. Just as an illustration, I mean, I think it's important that we think about who it is here that we're adjusting inflation to. This isn't general wages. This is people living in poverty. Where are they spending their money? So that's one thing. But again, you know, it's really about that base amount. When I look at what that means, so they're saying 3.1% adjustment For a single parent with one child, that's only about $30 extra a month. And our data shows, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's the gap? The gap is actually $1,400 a month to get them to what is a recognized poverty line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, tell us, kind of bring these numbers into reality here. What are we talking people on social assistance? What type of incomes are people living on?
So if you're looking at a single parent with one child, what they need is somewhere around $3,300 a month, and that's a market basket measure. That's the basics. That's a basic food basket. That's all in terms of shelter, transportation. What we all pay for: heat, electricity, etc. And what's being provided currently is 57% of that basket. So it takes $1. You're giving 60 cents on the dollar and saying, figure that out. That's a huge shortfall. Again, that's a shortfall. So if it's $3,300 that you need a month, you are short $1,400 currently. And that's not just what the provincial government is providing. That's everything that you can get access to from the federal government, the child tax credit. All of that is part of what we're looking at here. So that's a huge deficit for people. You can't really live on what's being provided. It's impossible. The decisions that are being made are: can you afford rent this month? What are you going to eat this month? You have to pay the rent first, so you do that, and then what? What's left? Very, very little is left. So that base amount is absolutely inadequate. So adjusting it, yes, let's adjust it, because we don't want to erode what is already inadequate. But it is far below what people need.
Okay, Scott Armstrong, the Minister of Opportunities and Social Development, said in a statement that the government knows how many Nova Scotians are struggling with the rising cost of essentials like rent and groceries. He added that the new indexing system offers reliable support for the 37 plus thousand people who received income assistance. What's your response to that?
It's just really not enough. So I'd like to I have asked to have a meeting with the new minister to discuss our data and to really understand where they think the opportunities are for these families who are really struggling. We've had decades where there's this misconception that has driven policy decisions about who is living in poverty. And if you're on income assistance and you're too dependent on the system, and the system is quote unquote too generous, well, then you're not going to have an incentive to go out and work. Right? We've all heard about that. That is the system that we have lived under. And what we know from the data is that is just not how we as humans function. If we are under tremendous stress every day, every week, every month, we can't afford a good home. You don't know if you're going to lose your home. You don't have enough food. Maybe you don't even have a roof over your head, given the amount of supports that are available. That's not an incentive. It is a complete disincentive. We have to stop with the bias against these families. And I'm going to underline why we think it's really obvious what that bias is. We have a Child and Family Services Act, which describes under what circumstances children are taken away from their families. Poverty is grounds for child neglect. Okay? This is the government and the minister that Mr. Armstrong is the minister of. That same minister, government department, has totally transformed the foster care system. We applaud the transformation. And what the transformation underlines is that they want to stop nickel and diming foster families, and they now are giving them enough, and I'm quoting them, enough for them to have the flexibility and autonomy to make child and family-focused decisions around how to spend their money, and they're going to give them enough money to, quote, reflect the costs of living and raising a child in Nova Scotia. That amount of money actually is pretty close to the market basket measure. It's $1,500 biweekly for a foster family. So I just want to underline, you're not the same department that's not giving enough to a family who is struggling, living in poverty, who could have their children taken away because they don't have enough money, could be going to a foster family who the same department is now paying almost 3 times more than that family on income assistance. That to me underlines hypocrisy and bias and misconceptions around who's living in poverty and how we help people. We help them by providing them enough to make decisions, to lift their heads above the water, to actually not, to get at that stress, to allow them to have housing, to allow them to keep their family together.
Well, here's the government with a supermajority, 2/3 majority, and with a mandate to govern, and now would be the time to do it, would it not, from a position of strength, if they're going to increase this?
They can do whatever they want at this point. Yeah. They have a majority government. They can, we've been waiting for them to, the previous Houston government said that they were going to release a target on reducing child poverty in particular. It wasn't released. There was consultations. We were involved in the consultations. We know there was work done in the department. We really want them to come forward now with that. What is your target? Please have a target. Please have a timeline. And yes, absolutely, this government can be moving forward on this file. We have lots of recommendations in our report. Income assistance is only part of it. Obviously, we really want to discuss how that all works together. But this in particular is really what is at the root cause of why so many people are not able to get ahead.
Christine, I always appreciate your input. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Todd.
All right, take care. Christine Saulnier, Director at the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives-Nova Scotia. We'll talk about the latest with surrounding 10 encampments when we come back. All right, Stephen Wilsack, Executive Director of Housing First Nova Scotia, joins us for a chat. Stephen, thanks for joining the show. We appreciate your time.
Always a pleasure to talk to you, Todd.
All right, so 10 encampments. Look, this is an issue as much as everybody would love to see go away. Certainly, first and foremost, those who are living in them. But it's not that simple, right? It's pretty evident that this is a continuing, growing challenge in our province.
Without a doubt, Todd, the crisis of homelessness is a $7 billion cost to the Canadian economy. The increase in cost of the healthcare, criminal system, emergency services, that's where our challenge lies. We have to get more funding put into our programs. The bottom line is that more people are going to die. Over the past few months, we've had 3 deaths so far. If we do not change the path that we are on, this is going to continue. Unfortunately, we have not addressed the fundamental issues. I've spoken to people in Prince Edward Island. I've spoken to advocates right across the province in the last day to ensure that the message gets out there. Things are not better. In fact, they're getting worse. So what are we going to do about it? We have to make changes. Fundamentally, we have to get our Premier Tim Houston to put more money into the system. Our newly elected mayor in Halifax, Andy, on the right track, but we need to get action. As you know, over the past year, there's been a lot of challenges, a lot of talk. Mm-hmm. There has been some funding put in there, but we're not at the stage where we're saying that this is a crisis. This is a crisis. Todd, we need to move forward in another direction.
Okay, so you say that things are getting worse. That's based on what data? And I'm not suggesting you're wrong, by the way, but to what data indicates that?
Yeah, sure. If you look at the by name list for the just in Halifax alone, there's 7,000 to 8,000 people that are on public housing. There's over 150 to 200 people that are living rough. There's over 3,000 people that are categorized on the by name list that do not have housing. I've spoken to people here in the Annapolis Valley. The numbers are up about 25%. I've spoken to people in Prince Edward Island. Their numbers have increased. There's an increased use of drugs in certain areas as well. So just look around the corner. If you look at all the encampments, the numbers are still the same, if not, they have increased. So the bottom line is what are we going to do about it? We have the opportunity to put more funding into it. There's vacant buildings that are available. We can at least get people out of the cold. We need to come up with innovative solutions in terms of micro-housing. We've shown that the model in Finland works, where if we start to identify people, that we can put people inside, indoors, and then we can start working on other levels of social programs. So in terms of, is it better or worse? The numbers speak for themselves, and the people that are feet on the ground, they're seeing it worse than ever.
All right. So the people who are living in these encampments, what can you tell us about the demographics or where the socioeconomic situations that people are dealing with here?
Sure. So in terms of the demographics, the age ranges from teenagers up to senior citizens. In fact, probably about 1/3 of the people that are living in encampments are female. The fact of the matter is that the funding that's available to people, whether if they're having mental health issues or addictions, there's people there that old age pension doesn't even cover the basic cost of living. So what's happening is that people are falling between the cracks. In fact, it's getting worse and worse. Rent evictions is still a major issue. There's no affordable housing. There's not alternatives that are being put out there. We talk about the vacancy rate going up. Well, the vacancy rate may be going up, but it's not going up for affordable housing. We need to find a way to bridge the gap between affordability and being able to put a roof over somebody's head. It's survival out there for many people, and as we know, the people are one paycheck away. There are evidence of domestic violence that's increasing because of various factors, and I'm sure financial is one of the major contributors to that. If you look at some of the solutions that have been put forth, the pallet shelters, it's a good first step. The tiny shelters, the tiny home village, it's a wonderful step forward in terms of showing a partnership, but we need more innovative housing. We've seen that it works in New Brunswick. So let's figure out what we can do here. We did the RV park in Shuby Park, wonderful concept. So let's figure out some more portable housing options. Let's figure out how to get people inside. Let's make things safe where encampments are. Let's create villages within these encampments. As you saw what we did last year, Todd, in terms of providing security, providing smoke detectors, providing heat, providing a community that has resources available to it. That's what we need to start talking about. If we continue on this path, nothing's going to change. I believe that Nova Scotia has the ability to make homelessness disappear, or at least get it into a manageable number. So let's move forward to do that.
Okay, just quickly, do you have concerns, and again, a minute or less, that the public in general is becoming almost desensitized to these issues? We go down whatever street it might be, Spring Garden, wherever, and see people living in tents, and after a while, you don't notice it, and that's even more dangerous. What are your thoughts on desensitization to this issue?
This is the whole thing about this, Todd, is that we have to raise alarms. Like, people are dying. If there were dogs that were on the side of the street, if there were dogs in encampments, what would we be doing about it? We'd be screaming. We'd be rescuing people. So let's not make this the norm. Let's figure out how we can save individuals. We had success stories when we were at Grand Parade Square. We know that there's 2 or 3 individuals every day that we made a difference in their lives. We got people into programs so people can be rescued. That's somebody's daughter. That's somebody's son out there. That's your cousin. That could be your neighbor next week. So let's not turn a blind eye to it. Let's show compassion. Let's show that we can make a difference here in Nova Scotia. And I really appreciate you bringing this topic to the forefront again, Todd. Thank you for everything.
Okay, Stephen, we'll talk again. Thank you so much.
Okay. Cheers.
All right, take care. Stephen Wilsack, Executive Director of Housing First Nova Scotia. Another animal dies as a result of fireworks. We'll discuss this when we come back.
Thanks.
All right, to this release, another animal dies as a result of fireworks. It comes from Dr. Hugh Chisholm. Fireworks Hurt is the name of the organization. Dr. Chisholm, thanks for joining the show. We appreciate your time.
Oh, thanks for having me back, Todd. I appreciate it.
Indeed. All right, so tell us about the latest incident here.
Well, sadly, another animal has succumbed to fireworks. A donkey in the northern part of the province was out in his paddock, and somebody, actually, I gather they were almost a kilometer away, was setting off fireworks, and the donkey was so startled and terrified that he started to run, and he unfortunately ended up breaking his back and had to be euthanized. But the saddest part of it all is he laid with his broken back for, I gather, more than 10 hours before the vet was able to get to him and end his suffering. So, it's just one more example of the tragedy that can happen when things like this are set off without any warning.
Okay, and it's certainly not a one-off. This is something you've been talking about now for years now at this point, right?
Yeah, we started this organization 3 years ago when a horse ended up breaking its leg after a neighbor set off fireworks, and the horse panicked, and the same thing happened. And I mean, the sad fact is there are probably wild animals that are undergoing the same trauma that we just never hear about, and so it's getting out of hand. It needs to be reined in.
How frequent are fireworks? Is there any? I suppose there's no way to monitor this. We don't know exactly how widespread these incidents are. As you mentioned, we just don't know, right?
Well, our group has been keeping statistics for the last couple of years. Whenever any of our members, hears fireworks being set off nearby, they log into our database and record it. And it is decreasing because the word is getting out there and more people realize the harm that this can cause. But unfortunately, there are still people out there who either don't know or don't care and, are still doing it without any thought to the consequences it may have, not just for animals, but for, people with PTSD and other Alzheimer's and autism, things like that. So, and the pollutants that are released by these things are kind of the unknown, invisible sort of risk that the public is facing, and not just the people setting them off, but neighbors nearby. If your air exchanger is on, you're bringing in these pollutants into your home environment, you're breathing them in, your kids are breathing them in, and God knows what sort of consequences that may have for your health. So we really need to have a serious look at just what this is causing and what we can do about it as a society.
All right, and I guess are there age restrictions? Are there any restrictions at all when it comes to point of purchase for these things, or can anybody buy them?
Well, supposedly you have to be 18 years of age or older in order to buy them, but I'm not sure how well that's being enforced, given that a lot of what's happening is happening by youth. And I mean, I was a youth once and did a lot of stupid things, and so if adults are not keeping tabs on what's happening out there, then, this kind of stuff will just continue.
All right. So when it comes to the law of the land and who has jurisdiction over changing possibly the laws, what can you tell us about jurisdiction here? Because from what I'm reading in your release, there seems to be some contradiction between who has jurisdiction and who doesn't.
Oh, yeah. The politicians like to punt this issue back and forth. But ultimately, the Federal Explosives Act is what controls the sale of fireworks in the country. But according to our Minister of Municipal Affairs, the Honourable John Lohr, he has no ability to do anything in Nova Scotia, and that's not true. If you read Section 29 of the Act, it says that provinces and municipalities can enact legislation, and in fact, PEI has done that. So Minister Lohr either hasn't read the Act or he's being disingenuous with the people of Nova Scotia because, he absolutely has the ability to do it. He is in charge of the Office of the Fire Marshal, and interestingly, the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs have actually asked the federal government to ban consumer fireworks. So, there are lots of people out there, not just our group, that have serious concerns about fireworks, the consumer version of fireworks. And so it's time for Minister Lohr to actually step up and do something instead of, hiding behind his claim that he can't.
All right, so you're not calling for the eradication of fireworks. If a municipality organizes it and it's known, then people can plan around that, right? It's the impromptu fireworks that you have issues with. Is that correct?
Yeah, they're called consumer fireworks. The things that you buy at the big box store or the corner store, and your next door neighbor sets them off without any warning, and that's the sort of thing that's out of control. And nobody in our group, officially is saying that we need to do away with Canada fireworks or, New Year's fireworks, that sort of thing. It's been part of our culture. It would be nice to see those replaced with something like drone shows so that, wild animals don't have to suffer the consequences, but that's not our agenda. Our agenda is to get consumer fireworks off the shelves and out of the hands of the people who just don't care.
Do you feel as though you're making any progress at all with this?
We are. We have seen a drop in the statistics, like I say. The shows like yours are getting the word out there, and people that care, when they know better, they do better. So it is improving, but the trouble is there's always a segment of society that doesn't care. Yeah. Those are the ones that are, the problem right now, and those are the ones that will never be conscious or worried about what happens. They're just worried about their own 15 minutes of fun, and that's just the kind of thing that we just can't tolerate as a society, in my opinion.
Yeah, and of course they're inherently dangerous as well to just to operate. Aside from the impact on wildlife and habitat, to human people, to human beings, they're potentially dangerous as well.
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, if you go on the internet and Google, injuries from fireworks, you see some pretty scary stories and photos of things that can happen. And there was a goalie from the NHL who was killed by a firework that went astray and hit him in the chest just a couple of years ago. Yeah. So, it's a risk for the user as well.
Yeah, and if you want people to check out your website and perhaps learn more about it, direct them, please, where they can find you guys.
It's banfireworksns.org. They can also find us on Facebook as Ban Fireworks Nova Scotia or Fireworks Hurt. So we've got a lot of different places where people can go for information.
Okay, Hugh, always appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Todd.
All right, take care. Hugh Chisholm, Dr. Hugh Chisholm. Trudeau is out. We'll talk about this with Laurie Turnbull when we come back. All right, joining us for a chat is Laurie Turnbull, Dalhousie University political science professor. Laurie Turnbull, hello.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm well. Yourself?
I am okay.
Excellent. Excellent. I took yesterday off. I had some things I had to take care of, and the whole country went to hell. What do you think?
Indeed. It's all your fault, Todd. You should never have taken the day off.
I know, eh? So, listen, where to start with this, I guess. We've had a pretty good coming on to 24 hours to kind of absorb this. What just kind of broad strokes thoughts right now? What have you been thinking about?
I mean, it's interesting. Like, we spend so much time thinking about when is the Prime Minister going to do this? Is he going to even do this? What's the plan going to be? And then he does it. And then, immediately it's like, okay, who's next? And so now I'm thinking about what is going to be the process for the leadership, right? And how are they going to get this off the ground in just a couple of months?
All right, so of the names that we're looking at here, and again, there's so many directions we could go with this chat, but let's, I guess, start with this. Of the names that are bandied about, nobody's, I don't think, formally said yes to running. But is there any name to you that stands out and for any reason above the rest of them when it comes to perhaps being a better choice for the Liberals?
As a better choice, like it's hard. So, I mean, among the names, like, I think it looks like Carney is quite interested in putting a bid in, and I'm not surprised by that. He's got obviously a heck of a lot of experience, and in terms of his economic record, I mean, it's hard to imagine anybody better qualified than him to take over the country at a time where the economy is needing some fixing, and where we might have to diversify our trade relationships because of the situation in the U.S. But at the same time, I mean, as far as I know, he's never run for anything. He doesn't have political experience. And I'm not sure necessarily that Carney is going to be a whole lot different than Michael Ignatieff, frankly. I think the Conservatives would be quite quick to frame him in that kind of light. A name that stands out for me, obviously, Chrystia Freeland, who I think a big reason that she left cabinet was to position herself for the leadership. Christy Clark, who was a British Columbia premier, a Liberal, but she's a Conservative, right? And so, like, it would be an interesting choice because I think she might actually be able to tap into some of the support for Poilievre that's soft. So she might be an interesting one. But again, like, it all depends on who can sign up the most members, and they've got very little time to do it.
Okay, what are your thoughts on the process here on what Trudeau decided to go with the prorogation until the 24th, and that's a pretty tight timeline. What are your thoughts? Could it have been done any cleaner, any better? Might there have been? And I suppose there's always alternatives, but what might have been, or do you think Trudeau did pretty much played the hand that he was dealt at this point?
Well, I mean, as far as his announcement yesterday, he played the hand that he was dealt because he did this, because he left himself with the hand that he was dealt. Yeah. He's the only one who could have decided he was going to leave earlier, and he didn't. And so I don't feel sorry for him. Like, he's the one who, the rest of us saw the writing on the wall, and I know it's not like that, right? When you're Prime Minister, whenever you're a politician, like, you don't think about how you're losing. You can't think like that, or else you'd collapse under the weight of it all. But still, he could have walked away long ago, and if he did, it would have left him in more of a position to be able to define his legacy on his own terms, finish on the kind of note that he wanted to finish on. It would be better for the country, and that we wouldn't be trying to figure out who the Prime Minister is when Trump's going to put 25% tariffs on. Like, this is crazy. But this is the way it is. We can't do anything about it now.
All right, so it lends itself to question, why would anybody even want this to be the leader of the Liberal Party when you're going to inherit an election? You're going to face down an election immediately, and would the hope be, or would the expectation be that it's a bit of a gimme that, okay, I'm going to take the leadership. I know we're probably going to get smoked in the next election, but that was a one-off, and then I'll be the leader. Will then be given a grace period and not punished because of losing the election. Is that kind of the unspoken agreement that might be brokered here?
Well, that's the thing, right, is that I think, it's possible. It's certainly possible that a new leader will change something about the Liberals' fortunes in the next election, but I don't know that the expectation is that they're going to win, right? Like, I mean, right now the Liberals are so behind in the polls. You're going to give a new leader, a matter of months to turn that around. I don't think that's a fair expectation, and I don't think that is the expectation. But whoever's going to take this on, it's with this knowledge that the likelihood is you're going to be on the back bench, and you're going to have to rebuild the party and start from scratch. And that is a huge lift. And is that what Mark Carney wants to do? Like, again, like, no offense. I mean, yeah. I just don't know why this. I mean, he was the Bank of Canada governor. He was the Bank of England governor. Like, the guy goes to Wimbledon and sits in the royal box. He wants to come and be a third place party leader. Like, I can't imagine that's what he wants to do. So what does he do if he runs and he loses? Like, is he going to stick around to rebuild or what?
Yeah, and I think that might be something that would be legitimate questions that should be asked by the party faithful. What are your intentions as if you want to be the leader? What are your intentions if you lose? And again, I know that they don't want to go in with a defeatist attitude, but you have to have a realistic approach to this. What are your thoughts?
That'd be the first question I'd ask.
Yeah.
Is we're probably going to lose. What are you going to do then?
Yeah.
Because if you're just going to bounce, well, the party doesn't need that. And you're like, the thing is, no matter what happens in the next election, whoever wins this leadership gets to be prime minister, for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And so it's not a bad prize at the end, even if you don't keep it. And so I would want to know, first and foremost, what is your long-term plan? Imagine we come third place. What are you going to do?
All right, because we all know that retail politics is a lot different than a leadership bid, right?
Oh, yeah, because the leadership is about the party.
Right.
Although it's weird because the Liberals are, among all the federal parties, I would say they are the most porous in terms of their requirements to register as a Liberal and things like that. You don't even have to pay a fee, right? Like, so it's not like it's a bunch of, dyed-in-the-wool, party faithful, party loyalists who are going to Liberals their whole life. Like, not necessarily, right? Like, this is about the contestants signing up as many members as they can in the time that they have. And I don't see there being anybody in the list of people who is going to take this thing on the first ballot, right? Like, there's no Trudeau, there's no Poilievre. It's probably going to go to second and third ballots. And that, I don't know, right? Like, it makes it hard to predict what the outcome will be.
Is there anybody that's not bandied about and not already kind of been shortlisted that you think might be a dark horse that might emerge? Or do you feel as though that anybody who would have already made that known?
I think there are probably still some quiet conversations. I heard Karina Gould last night potentially thinking about it. I can imagine being, in the party, being there for 9 years and never, like, this guy's got a hold on the party. It's not like you can just throw your name in. But now that you can, right, like, maybe some of them will think, you know what, to heck with it. I'm going to give it a try. I might not win, but why the heck not? Because if somebody does take it and stays with it, it's going to be, 6, 7, 8 more years before it's open again, right? And so some people just kind of have to take the timing when it works for them, even if the timing for the party is not awesome.
What about carbon pricing? This is something that I would think that somebody would have to make sure that the electorate and the Liberal would know what they're going to do moving forward, because carbon pricing and the carbon tax has been a real millstone around Trudeau's neck here and the Liberals' neck. So might somebody who's campaigning to be the leader say, look, this is something that we're going to revisit, or is this something that they should make their opinions known on carbon pricing?
I think that will be one of the things that is first and foremost on people's list, because that was one of the things I think that really sunk Trudeau, is when he would not budge from the position of the carbon price, even when people were really insistent on it, even when there was a sense that this was a massive collision with the affordability crisis. People in his own party didn't want it, and he kept with it. So I think one of the big questions to the leadership prospects is going to be, what are you going to do with something like that? And how will you respond when the party doesn't agree with a policy position that you want, right? Like, how are we going to manage that? Because I think that was a thing that they had with Trudeau, right? Like, there was just the sense it was his way or the highway, that was it. And I don't know that, like, I could imagine caucus members wanting to see a bit more of a consultative process from the next leader.
All right, so Pierre Poilievre, how do you approach, I guess, the next 3 months? Because I guess you can attack Trudeau, and by extension, anybody who was associated with him, certainly anybody who sat around his cabinet table. But strategically, how do you approach the next 3 months if you're Pierre Poilievre?
Well, I think we can sort of see him doing this. Like, he's already trying to basically say, look, who cares? Like, there's no difference. Trudeau walked away. It doesn't matter. The next person is going to be just like him anyway. So, it's all systems go. Don't worry, that kind of thing. Like, trying to kind of take some of the excitement maybe out of the possibility of a new leader. He doesn't want to lose anything, obviously. He doesn't want to lose any of his lead. Because even if the Liberals start to go up in the polls a bit, right? Like, he's not going to like that. He has held this lead for months and months now. And if it starts to look like Trudeau's departure helps the Liberals, I think Poilievre, he's not going to like that. He's going to try to define whoever takes the job so that people really do see it as an extension of Trudeau rather than something new.
Yeah, and when do people start looking to talk about a legacy? Is this something that I'm sure that anybody would be self-interested in to a point, but what are your thoughts on Trudeau and a legacy? Might we need a little distance between this and a little time, I think, before we start thinking legacy? What are your thoughts?
I suspect that's the case because right now his legacy feels like he stayed too long. Like it's more like the legacy is more about him and his political choices in this moment. But I think as time goes on, sure, right? Like there will be things like the changes to the child benefit and changes to pensions and things like that. Like there will be pieces of his legislative and policy program that stand out to people as, this is what the Trudeau government was about. But then there will be failures too. There'll be things that didn't go well. There will be the SNC-Lavalin situation, the WE scandal, the blackface. I think his legacy will be mixed, to be honest. And he'll always be the COVID prime minister, right? Like that's going to be a defining part of his legacy, even though that was totally beyond his control.
Right. Okay, Lori, always great. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks, Todd.
All right, take care. Lori Turnbull, Dalhousie University political science professor. Now, what is on your mind? Give us a call at 902-405-6000. What do you think about all of this? Is the shock settled in yet, or perhaps you weren't shocked at all? What are your thoughts on Trudeau's exit? 902-405-6000. You can get into that or anything else you'd like to talk about. Again, 902-405-6000. An open hour when we come back.
Facts.
So taking your calls, 902-405-6000. What would you like to talk about today? We got a lot of open lines for you folks. Give us a buzz, 902-405-6000. I'm surprised that more of you don't want to talk about Justin Trudeau. Perhaps there's not much else to be said. I don't know. I would think, though, that there would be some curiosity or some thoughts on this. Give us a call at 902-405-6000. What, were you surprised, I guess? What about Trudeau's successor? Who do you think, if anybody, is a good, viable candidate? Does any of this group impress you or excite you? Whether it be Dominic LeBlanc, Melanie Joly, Chrystia Freeland, Anita Anand, Francois-Philippe Champagne, Mark Carney. Any of these people entice you, or would they inspire you to vote Liberal? I personally would have to say that none of the above for me, and it needs to be mentioned that I don't think anybody's officially submitted their or stepped forward yet. I don't know what the timeline is or what the process is, but it's got to be soon because the Parliament is prorogued until the 24th of March, and then the Liberals will have to have a leader in place by then. So what are your thoughts, I guess, on Justin Trudeau and his exit out of politics, although he's still going to be around, more or less a figurehead at this point for the next little while? 902-405-6000. What do you think of the legacy of Justin Trudeau? Is there a legacy here? Do you think that history will remember him more fondly than certainly in the here and now? And history tends to do that. Not only for prime ministers, but I think for people in general and everybody. People are generally remembered more fondly with time as the passage of time goes on. Not to suggest that Trudeau is not alive, of course he is, but his political life is what we're talking about. And does that matter, do you think? And I think obviously to anybody, I think your legacy matters if you want to be remembered in a good light for the most part. No, obviously that's not going to be unanimous, and you're always going to have detractors and naysayers and people who are going to be critical, and I think rightfully so. So I guess you can talk about, I guess, kind of general thoughts on Trudeau and his decision to step aside. What type of legacy will Trudeau leave? Good or bad? Who's next? What about the process in general? Do you think that it's unfair for Trudeau to step aside in this way and to leave the Liberals a very short window in order to find a leader? And can they rebuild? Can they somehow regain their mojo and win the next election? Is it even possible? Because the outwardly, that of course that's what they're going to say. They're not throwing in the towel. Now, clearly the caucus has been heard here and basically forced Trudeau out at this point. You can be assured that he didn't want to go willingly, I would dare say. But anyway, lots and lots to unpack here. What are your thoughts on all of this in general? And again, if you think that the Liberals can rebuild, and if there's any leader or any potential prospective leader here that excites you, let that be known. There's nobody on the list that I'm looking at, including Christy Clark, including Mark Carney, including Anita Anand, including Melanie Jolie. None of them, I don't think, can get it done. And I don't know what this means long term. I don't know that whoever gets elected as the Liberal leader, if they get blown out in the next election, do they get a pass? Do they get to stick around for another 4 years and try and win after that? I don't know. 902-405-6000. Let's go to the phones. Talk to Mike. Hello, Mike.
Hey, how's it going?
Well, you?
I'm doing well. I think Frank McKenna would be a great bet to take over the Liberal Party. Right now, we need somebody who can negotiate a good trade deal with the United States, because if these tariffs come to fruition, it's going to destroy the Canadian economy. It's going to destroy Nova Scotia's economy. Frank McKenna has deep relationships in the United States. He brings a lot of credibility in terms of his own career, and I think he would be the best positioned for the job. I can't think of anybody else other than Frank McKenna who has those kinds of deep relationships in Washington and in the United States that could pull off a deal that doesn't ruin Canada's economy, because that's what we're facing when Trump comes into power. These tariffs are going to be absolutely devastating.
I don't know that he wants a job. He certainly hasn't indicated that. Frank McKenna's name's been floated for the leadership of the Liberal Party for decades now, pretty much since he's left politics, provincial politics in New Brunswick. But I don't know that he's interested in the job, Mike, to be honest with you. I've not heard that he is.
Well, the times are very important, and maybe the situation that Canada finds itself in will implore Frank McKenna to reconsider that, because really we are facing an existential crisis in terms of protectionism in America. So I think Frank McKenna should reconsider his position on that, because otherwise I see Canada really going down the tubes.
Okay, thanks for the call, Mike. Appreciate it. Take care. 902-405-6000. Rick, hello.
Hey, good morning.
Hi.
I don't agree with the last caller.
Okay.
The reason I say that is because you might remember Kim Campbell. Remember her, who she was?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, our first lady prime minister.
Yeah.
She was given the job of mopping up the mess after Brian Mulroney left. And at that point, I don't think there was a more hated Canadian prime minister until the current one. Mm-hmm. So the whole idea of worrying about the Liberals and what they do is just silly. They're going to put somebody in there to take care. Poilievre is going to govern for the next 4 years. They're going to probably boot that leader out, the Liberals, in at some point after about a year, when somebody with more charm like Justin comes along. So it's just a cycle. That's all it is. It's not anything worth worrying about or thinking about the Liberals, the poor Liberals. What are they going to do? The good thing is with the prorogation of Parliament is that the Liberals can't do any more damage. They can't, create another program and give away, $100 million to some foreign country or something like that. Mm-hmm. In the meantime, just got to be patient. It's good stuff to talk about on talk radio and the news, but over time it's just going to fizzle away. And a year from now, we won't be talking about Trudeau, in any way the same way we weren't talking about Mulroney. He went into his retirement. Now, mind you, it did lead to the combination of the Canadian Alliance and the Canadian Progressive Conservative Party, which is, where we are today with the Conservative Party of Canada. And, some people say that was a bad thing. Some people say it was a good thing. All I know is that, they're poised to take power, and we're going to have to live with that. I don't mind the ideas. Axing the tax would be a great thing for most people, and it's not the only thing. I've been following along pretty closely. So anyway, that's just my take on that.
Okay, Rick, appreciate the call. Take care. 902-405-6000. I'm not sure how long Kim Campbell was the Prime Minister. Of course, she inherited that role once she won the leadership of the Progressive Conservative Party of Canada, of course, at that time. And then that party was decimated to just 2 seats, including Elsie Wayne in St. John. So, and as Rick talked about, that led to the alliance and the kind of that movement in Western Canada, and which is now morphed into the Conservative Party of Canada, which used to be the Progressive Conservative Party of Canada. 902-405-6000. But this next leader will have even a shorter window than that, I'm sure, because and we're talking literally 5 minutes, pretty much, of being at the helm when it'll be faced with a confidence motion and probably right out of the gate with a throne speech when Parliament resumes. Joe, hello.
It doesn't matter who the Liberals put in now. Like you say, he's going to be there her is going to be there 5 minutes. Trudeau was incredibly selfish and self-centered. He should have done this 6 months ago. He left us with a lame duck prime minister during the most critical negotiation, which Trump is going to eat him up and spit him out. This was incredibly selfish on his part, but all the leaders, I think they get God complexes or other. Pierre did it. He did Chrétien in, and then Chrétien did Turner in, and then Brian Mulroney did Kim Campbell in. They stay too long. I know. I think it must be a God complex or something. And they get in there and they think they're infallible.
Yeah, I think there's certainly an aspect to that for sure. But they do think they're infallible, and they become detached from reality. And perhaps Justin Trudeau, in some way, doesn't. I mean, who knows what's going on in the inner workings of his mind? But maybe he doesn't want to see the Liberals win the next election, because if imagine what that would do to his pride if somebody replaced him and 3 months later managed to pull off an upset over the Pierre Poilievre Conservatives. That would be a massive blow to his ego, I'm sure, right?
Isn't that a selfish thing, eh? Well,
okay, Joe. Thanks for the call.
Thank you.
All right, take care. 902-405-6000. What are your thoughts on this, folks? Give us a call. Get open lines for you. 902-405-6000. Justin Trudeau, thoughts in general, legacy, who will replace him? Can anybody get it done? Whatever you want to talk about, that or anything else. 902-405-6000. We'll continue with your calls when we come back. All right, taking your calls, 902-405-6000. Dawn, hello.
Good morning, Todd. How you doing?
I'm well, you?
Not too bad. Hope you're feeling good nowadays.
Yep, not bad.
No. Anyway, I called you. Talked to a couple people outside the province and state. They're Liberals. We get along good, though. No problem. Here's their thing is. In the next, within a week or so, and I said, anyway, they said that Dominic will take over and probably lead us into the next election. And then after that, now that's what they were telling me. And they said that it's going to be a blue wave hit. Then they'll go with a full, about 10 or 12 people go for the leadership, and they're going to rebuild for the next 6 to 8 years. They'll rebuild. That's what they were telling me. But I like this. I didn't like the idea of the way they said it. But you wouldn't believe for the last 6 or 8 months, the knives in each other's back up there, and 6 of them. It goes for every party. You know that.
Yep.
You realize that, right?
Yep,
every
for
party. Sure. Even my conservative. I'm a diehard conservative. I'm a Stanfield boy. People know that.
Yeah.
But anyway, it happened 4 years ago, within the last 4 years, and it's still going on. Anybody's interested in politics, Michael will tell you this, and Kate Britton. But anybody will tell you this. The backstabbing, your good friend, I'll vote for this now. It's backstabbing. I don't mean to say, to hurt anybody. Mm-hmm. That's just no political term.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Everybody knows that. Politics is a vicious game. It's blood sport, for sure it is.
And it's no different you know what? In families and business too.
Yep.
I know a businessman here, a guy, 3 or 4 of them in a business together, and guess what? It's down to one. And all that. But getting back to politics, it's going to, and just prolonging the thing over here. The Governor General, if she used her own rules and in her own mind, she could do this. This was this political guy told me last night too. If she wanted to do it, she could cancel everything and appoint somebody and go into a general election. That's her job. She's the head of the country right now, the Governor General. Is that correct or not?
Head of state, yeah.
Okay. She can, same as the lieutenant governor here. Anyways like that. She could say to we're having an election. She could pick. They have the choice of picking a leader, but you're having an election. All this chaos going on, and whoever wins it, good. Or she can appoint, like David Peterson up in Ontario. The lieutenant governor went to. They said, no, we're going to put David Peterson in there for 2 years, the Liberal. After 2 years, they booted him out, and Harris got in there. That's different. That's provincial. This is federal. But it's the same kind of ruling. But there was people I was talking to in Ottawa last night. Just not because they're from Ottawa. They work in there. It's that's what they think is going to happen. Not Simon and Smith, but that's what they think they're going to happen. Because Dominic's the head guy. More or less the Joe guy in the thing, and he'll. But it's going to be the wheel-weed's going to hit. And as far as Christie, I like the girl and all of that. Don't get me wrong. But if you're not French completely, it's happened to Peter MacKay. Mm-hmm. He was speaking up English. I'm just saying, plain from our fact. He was English. People wanted him in. But out west, they didn't want him in there. I'm serious. This is what it is. From Toronto out, the west, they didn't want an Easter in there.
Okay, Don. Listen, appreciate your insight. Okay. Thanks for the call, pal. Take care. 902-405-6000. Sam Austin giving us a call. Sam, you've got a correction that you want to pass along from yesterday. Is that correct?
Yes. Hi. When I was on yesterday, we had some discussion there about the police armored vehicle, which has been a bit of an issue. And I had some incorrect info that I passed on to people, so I was wanting to correct that record if you had a moment for me here.
Go for it.
So the piece that has already been approved, because it was built into the fleet budget from last year, is 2 armored vehicles, but they're not the armored vehicles that everyone's kind of picturing in terms of the past discussion about, thing that people were calling a tank, which was notably armored. I mean, the 2 vehicles that are approved are basically pickup trucks with some reinforcement, completely indistinguishable from any civilian vehicle out there. So, it's really not a police militarization thing. So that's already approved, and that was all well and proper by our CEO. The one that is not approved, of course, which is the one that folks have the most interest in, is the kind of larger armored vehicle, and that will come forward in our budget deliberations for this year. So, when I was on the other day, I thought that the armored ones that were approved were actually the heavy ones, not the pickup trucks. So that's where that is. Okay, good. Thanks for the clarity, Sam. Appreciate it. No problem. Every now and then I have to do this. So. All right. Thanks, pal. Thank you. All right. Take care. 902-405-6000. Rowena, hello.
Hello.
Hi there.
I just want to throw a name out there to replace Trudeau.
Okay.
How about Jody Wilson-Raybould? I think she would be great.
Yeah.
Remember the one he kicked out of caucus?
Yeah. Former Justice Minister, Jody Wilson-Raybould. Yeah.
And Indigenous, too.
Yeah.
So I wonder if there's any way we could get a bug in her ear.
Well, look, I suppose, but to this point, I've not heard any interest from her, at least, but you never know, I suppose. Thanks, Rowena. Yeah. Appreciate the call. Okay. All right, take care. 902-405-6000. That is the way to get a hold of us. Abdul, hello. Hey, Abdul. Abdul, are you there?
Hello?
Yep, go ahead.
Hello?
Yep, go ahead.
I thank you for the... I'm just thinking that at this point in time, it's just going to be a little bit difficult for for Liberal Party to put things in place. But I think at this point, it's also a kind of late for Justin Trudeau to step down at this point. But with the whole thing, I think it's going to be, one of the callers suggested Frank, I think he's Frank McKenna. And I think for somebody like Frank McKenna, it's just going to be a very good candidate to be able to at least create that kind of strong relationship and put in place for Liberal Party, and also to be able to stabilize things. I think what they need right now is to be able to put somebody that is very, very strong to put a lot of things in place. And I think a woman candidacy, somebody like, what's her name? The former PM, Chrystia Freeland, will also be a good candidate to also stabilize things. And I believe I think what the people really want is somebody that is not Trudeau, but I don't think people really want Poirier, but they want somebody, but he's not going to be just Trudeau. But Frank would be a better position to also create that relationship, and Frank can be able to withstand, create that very strong relationship with Donald Trump in the U.S. and be able to balance a lot of things. So that's what I think is going to be. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for the call. 902-405-6000. What are your thoughts on all of this, folks? Perhaps you've agreed with some things that you've heard today. Perhaps you've disagreed with some of the things you've heard today. That's all good. As far as Chrystia Freeland goes, look, I can't imagine, I just can't imagine her ever winning the next election. If I'm a liberal and I want to position myself or position the party into a place of success, I just can't imagine it's with her. I really can't, for a ton of reasons why. I know that she gained some political capital with this move that she pulled off recently, which put the dominoes into play, which put us into yesterday with Trudeau resigning. But I don't know that that's enough political capital to bank on her ever winning the next election. I just can't imagine that it would happen. But look, perhaps some of you disagree with that. Maybe some of you think that she'd be a great choice. Give me a call. Tell me why. 902-405-6000. What would you like to get into, that or anything else? 902-405-6000. We'll continue with your calls when we come back. All right, continuing with your calls, 902-405-6000. What would you like to get into today? Again, 902-405-6000. So far, everybody who's called the show has talked about, I do believe, with the exception of Sam Austin, who called with a correction, and we appreciate that. Yes, what are your thoughts on Justin Trudeau's announcement yesterday? Resignation. Look, this was something that obviously he didn't foresee. Nobody... I think people, you get a state of hubris almost, if not entirely hubris. I think Trudeau probably felt that he would end his political career in a way that he wanted to, leaving more under his own volition, under his own momentum. But that's not what happened. And I think for Justin Trudeau, it was a disastrous ending to a political career which started out so incredibly positive. You think back to the heyday of Trudeau when he won the leadership of the Liberals, and then in 2015 took power as Prime Minister. His popularity was overwhelmingly immense, and to deteriorate and erode it to the point where yesterday, where his own caucus basically pushed him out, that is serious humble pie. But I suppose in politics, if you stick around long enough, that's the inevitable outcome, isn't it? 902-405-6000. So what are your thoughts on what we witnessed yesterday, on how we got to this point? What choices do you think the Liberals have here? What legitimate options are there here Are there any legitimate options when it comes to retaining power? Is it even possible? I would dare say that it's likely virtually impossible for the Liberals to win the next election. Because I'm looking at the short list of names, and again, nobody's officially put their name forward. But none of these names, I think there's reason for doubt surrounding all of them. Chrystia Freeland at the top of the list. She seems to be popular now within caucus because of her move that she made, which led to the dominoes falling for Justin Trudeau. And she was clearly mistreated. I think that's pretty evident. And I respect the fact that she stood up for herself and did so eventually. But you can't erase the attached at the hip in every way with Justin Trudeau for the last number of years, including the very controversial climate pricing or carbon pricing. And I would say that the same could Anita Anand, Philippe Champagne, Dominic LeBlanc, you go right down the list of anybody who's in cabinet or a member of parliament. I think that they're just damaged goods for a lot of reasons. And Mark Carney as well. And I think that that would be easy prey for Pierre Poilievre. So what do they do? I don't know. I don't know what's next for the Liberals, but I don't know why anybody, quite honestly, would want the role. Because, yes, you're going to be prime minister for a very, very short window, but then you're going to be facing an election, and a tough election under very difficult circumstances. 902-405-6000, that is the way to reach us. Give us a call. What would you like to get into? 902-405-6000. Donna, hello.
Hi. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
I just want to say the best news for me and millions of other people of 2025 is Trudeau resigning. Yesterday was my nephew's birthday. He said and he can't stand Trudeau because of the way the economy and blah, blah, blah. But he said it was the best birthday gift he's had in the past 9 years was to hear that Trudeau finally resigned. And he's not going out in a blaze of glory. He's going out in a little bit of embarrassment. And you are a very smart man. Everything you've said about the potential list or whatever, I agree 100% with you. Anyway, that's and my next best news of the year, hopefully, will be when Pierre gets elected as Prime Minister and the Liberals fall to last place. Anyway.
Okay. All right. Thanks for the call. 902-405-6000. Clinton's giving us a call. Hello, Clinton.
Good morning. How are you doing today, Todd?
I'm well. You?
Good. Glad to hear your voice again.
Thank you, sir.
Couple of just quick points. So look, I think, a couple of things. So for me, there was two big stories yesterday. The first big one was obviously the Trudeau resignation. But the bigger and more dangerous and worrisome story yesterday was the statement that Donald Trump put out and the specific quote that he said, and I'll quote him, quote, "If Canada joins the United States, there'll be no tariffs," close quote. So that's a pretty strong statement. Basically, from his position, Canada should only exist as an American state and not as an independent nation. And he put that out on his social media yesterday. Unfortunately, it hasn't really been talked about because it kind of got buried. But to me, that by far was a bigger news story than Trudeau's resignation.
Do you think he's serious? I'm not suggesting that he's not, but do you feel he's serious?
Yeah. I really do. Yeah, because over the course of 30 days, he started off with a few sort of subtle jokes that everybody was like, "Oh, he's kind of cute and funny, and look how humorous he is." Standing in front of mountains with a Canadian flag, and then that ratcheted it up slowly to, tariffs this and tariffs that. And then over the course of 30 days, we got to where we were yesterday, where he said, quote, "If Canada joins the United States, there will be no tariffs." So that's very, very clear to me that he plans to proceed with tariffs. And then when people in Canada say stuff like, "Well, they need our oil," the reality is they don't. The United States is actually in discussions right now with the country of Venezuela to set up an oil deal for the Gulf Coast, Venezuela's heavy oil, in order to replace oil sands bitumen from Canada. So there's a lot of stuff that's going to unfold that I think is quite concerning. In regards to Trudeau, look, I think there's two legitimate people that could replace him. Christy Clark, the former Premier of British Columbia, is somebody that could really turn things around. And then the other one is Mark Carney. And the reason I say that is I tie that into the 25% tariffs. Mark Carney is a former governor of Bank of Canada and the Bank of England. If Canada does in fact face an across-the-board 25% tariffs, we're going to need people like Carney that understand matters related to finance and commerce. And lastly, what I'll say is in Canada, we have a constitutional 5-year limit term. People often think it's 4 years, but if the government can find a majority of MPs in the House of Commons, they can put off the election until September 2026 at the very latest. So to answer your question, yeah, there's people who would definitely want the Liberal Party leadership, especially if they believe that they can give themselves enough runway, to be successful.
Yeah, is that realistic though, Clinton? I don't think that Pierre Poilievre, I think at this point would.
No, I think it is realistic. Yeah, I think it's realistic. I really do. I think that there's a mistaken belief that Pierre Poilievre is there to win. I mean, nothing. This is not a criticism of the Conservatives, but their entire campaign was essentially, "We're not Justin Trudeau," and with Trudeau gone, that clears the deck. And I do agree with you that you can't have somebody from the existing caucus as the leader because they're just going to be tarred and feathered with the negatives that are associated with Trudeau. So in that case, you have to find a leader that's from, outside of the party, which is why I say Christy Clark from BC or Mark Carney. And then the other thing is when that new leader is elected, obviously they're going to have to put in place a new cabinet, a cabinet that wasn't there during some of the questionable Trudeau stuff. And then lastly, what I will say is, yeah, Trudeau's very unpopular now, and that happens with every prime minister. Like, I hear a lot of people celebrating. I mean, I remember when Stephen Harper lost, people celebrated, and then when Brian Mulroney lost, and so on and so forth. When prime ministers have been in power for a decade, people get tired of them. They get angry with them. They get frustrated with them. They get upset with them. And then usually once those prime ministers have been out of office for, a decade and a half, public opinion starts to, become a little more balanced. And I'm not saying that as someone that's a liberal or anything. I'm just saying that's usually how these things, ebb and flows way.
Yeah, and that's celebrities or a lot of people, right? People tend to romanticize the past, I think, and that's human nature.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, look at I'm a huge Brian Mulroney supporter, and I mean, look how Brian Mulroney was able to rehabilitate, his reputation, and the same thing with Jean Chrétien, right? So over time, people's anger starts to soften, and they look back on things and they go, you know what, it wasn't all bad. There was good things that happened too, and it's a matter of balancing the positives from the negatives and that kind of thing.
Okay, Clinton, thanks for calling. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries. Have a great day, Todd, and keep fighting.
Okay, take care, pal. 902-405-6000. We'll continue with your calls when we come back. All right, continuing with your calls, 902-405-6000. Again, 902-405-6000. Hello, Bill.
How you doing, Todd?
Hey, I'm all right, pal. How are you?
Just get my breakfast. Two things, Todd. Two things.
Yeah.
One, Trudeau. Now, when he makes all these decisions, carbon tax or whatever, major decisions, is this a one-man decision, or does he have to talk with others in Parliament or other senators or whoever? What's the story on that one?
That's a good question. I don't know the inner workings of how much dialogue he had with people. Some would say not enough. One of the criticisms of Trudeau was that he didn't listen to enough people, and this is quite common, I think, with leaders, is they surround themselves with what we could call sycophants, or people that'll just tell them what they want to hear, and yes men or lackeys or whatever terminology you want to use. But I don't know how much he put into decision making, how unilateral that was, how independent he was, how much dialogue he had with other people. I don't know that, Bill, and I would suppose that only a few people would know that.
Well, that should be pretty standard. I mean, not just him, but all the others who are there, Harper and so on. I mean, don't they have to? Wouldn't the Prime Minister have to go and work with the others and say? In other words, it's not a one-man decision. That should be, the others. But anyway, that's that one. The other one that Trudeau can perhaps redeem himself.
How?
Well, what he's got to do, I mean, right now is look at. I would say, if I was in his position, I would look at all the things that irritate the people, like carbon tax, for instance, as just one thing. Look at them all and say, okay, what do we do? Did I make a mistake? Did the rest of my people with me, senators and so on, make the mistake? Why don't I just simply come up and say, all right, all you folks out there that don't like what I done, decisions, let's look at them. Carbon tax, you don't like it, we'll do away with it. In others, do away. Reverse all these old things that got the people all upset and say, there you are. That's my farewell to you.
Okay, Bill. Appreciate the call. Thank you.
What do you think of that one?
Well, perhaps, I guess. I don't know that Trudeau can do anything to redeem himself in the short term, that's for sure. Perhaps history will remember him more fondly than in the long term than in the short term. Thanks, Bill. Appreciate it, Bill.
Okay.
Take care. 902-405-6000. Chris, hello.
How you doing, Todd? And welcome back to the airwaves.
Thank you.
Good to hear your voice.
Thank you.
Yeah, pro patria, brother.
Right on.
Hey, listen, this Trudeau and remembering history. Listen, I still hate his father.
Oh, there you go. There you go.
So, whether history is kinder to people, I think he's one of these people that won't be remembered in history as a good prime minister by all rights.
Well, perhaps you're right.
And as far as his cabinet, who's going to lead the Liberal Party? I mean, every one of these people were, as you say, sycophants. And, your Christian Freelands, I mean, she rode along his side for years, supporting every one of his progressive, ideologies. And it's just ridiculous. Now, I wanted to ask you, did you watch him and Mr. Jordan Peterson's interview, Mr. Poilievre?
Yeah, I tried. I thought it was a lightweight interview, to be honest with you. I know that for whatever reason, people were. I don't like interviews like that because it just seems to me that there was such an agenda there that Jordan Peterson had, and it was to make this guy look as good as he could possibly make him. I did not. I watched a bit of it, but it didn't compel me, to be honest with you. It didn't engage me.
Well, I watched the whole interview. I thought it was a well-done interview.
Well, because you're a huge Poilievre fan, right? That's the reality of it. And for I think.
Actually,
go ahead.
Actually, I'm not necessarily a huge Poilievre fan. However, I am a conservative.
Well, right. So you're naturally going to love it because it was it was a softball interview without any meat on the bone at all, and basically Jordan Peterson designed that whole chat to make Pierre Poilievre look as good as he possibly could make him look. That's my takeaway on it. I didn't find there any substance at all to that interview at all.
You didn't find any substance. He asked a lot of policy questions that Poilievre answered.
Yeah, well, there was none every single one I could have answered on behalf of Pierre Poilievre easily. It was talking points, Conservative Party talking points, the entire thing. That was my takeaway, Chris. I didn't find it engaging at all. Disappointed in it, actually.
Oh, well, that's unfortunate.
That's just my that's just my take on it. I didn't find it interesting at all.
No, that's fine.
Yeah,
that's fine. However, I think going into the way Mr. Trudeau handled this whole situation, I mean, he's just shut down our government.
Yeah,
and right in an absolute critical time where Trump is coming into office.
Yeah, that's true. The timing couldn't be worse.
The timing absolutely couldn't be worse.
Yeah.
He shut down our government. We're not going to do anything now until what, March?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, and Chris to revisit the not to be repetitive, but to revisit the interview Jordan Peterson interview. I said the same thing about Liberal podcast which Trudeau appeared on. It was the same thing. They just set the stage for Trudeau. And again, when I look for to those type of interviews, I look for I look to hear some I don't know, something more than that, I guess. I can't describe it any other way. Anyway, Chris, I want to get one more on. Thanks for the call. Carl, hello. Go ahead, Carl.
Hey, Todd. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
Boy, in the surfing world, we say what a difference a day makes. 2 feet yesterday, 20 today. Wow. Oh, my goodness. Sam forgot to mention how much these armored vehicles are going to cost us. He didn't tell us that part, and that's what everybody wants to know.
Mm-hmm.
Furthermore, while you were away, we had a caucus among your listeners, and you've been tapped on the shoulder, pal. It's official. We want you to be the governor of Canada. How does that sound?
The governor of Canada, yeah, sure. We'll see.
Well, Trump's going to throw in Greenland. You'll rule over Greenland, too.
There you go. It sounds tempting. It sounds very tempting, Carl, I must say.
I wonder how much the job pays. You might want to take a look.
There you go. Okay, Carl. Thanks, pal. Appreciate it. All right. Harold, quickly. You got to be quick, though. Be a minute or less.
I can be very quick. It doesn't really matter who's been there, who's going to be there, or what's going on. We had Jack Layton years ago. It's the man that looks after, or the person, let me rephrase that looks after what's going on. When we come through this COVID episode, everybody would have done the same thing. Now we're trying to recover from that. We're trying to recover from other things. And I voted for all. I've won for some, lost for some. But just to say, it's not the physical person that's there. I think it is the physical person that's there, I guess, is what I should say. It's who is pursuing the option.
Okay, fair enough. Thanks for the call. Take care. Appreciate the calls, everybody. We'll do it again tomorrow. We'll open the phone lines between noon and 1 tomorrow, with it being Wednesday. Dr. Gillis will be by for house calls from 11 until 12. It is a Tuesday. That means it's the Science Files. If you've got a science-related question, if you'd like to talk to Rob Thacker, give us a call, 902-405-6000. Rob Thacker and the Science Files when we come back.
Thanks.
All right, it's the Science Files, the first Science Files of 2025. If you'd like to chat with Rob Thacker, give us a call at 902-405-6000. Again, 902-405-6000. Rob Thacker, astrophysicist from St. Mary's University. Rob Thacker, Happy New Year, I suppose.
And a Happy New Year to you, Todd, and to everyone else who's out there listening.
Indeed, for sure. 902-405-6000. That is the way to reach us. Again, if you'd like to chat with Rob Thacker, 902-405-6000. So you did some snowshoeing over the break, I hear.
Yeah, no. So my wife and I we've done snowshoeing for many years, but we went on a holiday to Japan and really spent like 2 weeks snowshoeing around everywhere. And so we totally got into it. And so we thought we'd buy some when we came home. And we decided to go at High Head Trail near Prospect on Christmas Day. And we were the only people out there, fresh snow. It was really quite incredible. So, yeah, a lot of fun.
Nice. 902-405-6000. That's the way to reach us. Again, 902-405-6000. Of course, snowshoeing is a pastime, but was considered obviously a mode of transportation at one point for, and still is, right, on Earth.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to get around anywhere, I mean, obviously you can cross country ski and so on, but there's not the same level of control, especially in steep regions, in a pair of skis as compared to a pair of snowshoes. So they are really a good way of getting around. I mean, they take a little bit of getting used to, and if you get into tricky territory, they can be not so easy to negotiate with, especially if there's combinations of rock and ice. But overall, they're a pretty cool thing.
Yeah, for sure. 902-405-6000. Thinking of modes of transportation through hazardous terrain, this was early explorers. This was a way of figuring it out, right?
Well, how else were you going to get around?
Yeah.
I mean, if you're carrying, especially if you're carrying a lot of weight with you, right? So, I mean, okay, most of the time you're going to be dragging something that's snow because you won't have much friction, so you can drag it along behind you. But if you want to be able to stay above the snowpack, then you've got no choice. You've got to have snowshoes.
And of course, I think of some of the earlier explorers and canoes and portages and all of that. I mean, it was not easy to get around back in the day, right?
Goodness me. I mean, when you think about the canoeing side of things and having the journey with the flow, that's not too bad. But the journey against the flow, boy. Yeah. Right? Seriously, that's a lot of paddling.
Yeah, and of course, the not knowing. I mean, I think of these early explorers. I'm reading a book now about the Hudson's Bay Company and its history and it's good and bad and for a lot of reasons. But my oh my, those early explorers, the bravery that would be needed, right?
It was a very different mindset. I mean, it was about self-sufficiency. You didn't know what you were expecting. I agree. It's very, very different to the kind of world we live in now.
For sure. 902-405-6000. That's the way to reach us for the Science Files with Rob Thacker. Give us a call. We got open lines for you folks if you'd like to ask Rob Thacker a question or two. Again, 902-405-6000. This email question from Mark says, if objects in space have an effect on each other like our moon and the Earth, why do they hold a stable and predictable orbit?
Oh, that's a fun question. And so what you've got to think about is that with an orbit, you've got two components that are really contributing to the motion. And so once you start something going in space, you give it a push, it will keep on going within the gravitational field that it's in, right? So if you push something that's in a gravitational field, you can give it a small push and it will just sort of like fall down towards the other object. Or you can give it a bigger push and it will go further away before falling down. And so an orbit is that point at which there's a balance between the sort of like speed of moving away versus being pulled towards the object. It's literally, you can think about it as falling around the object, but you're doing it again and again and again and again and again. And so that's the reason why you have this situation of having orbits where they just keep on going around. If you literally stopped the moon, right, and then let it go, then, well, bad news, folks, it's going to hit the Earth, right? But because it's going round and around and around, it's not going to hit the Earth because it's got enough sideways motion to actually keep on going around in its stable orbit.
Yeah, do you think that these things were created by some grand design, or was it just happenstance? I mean, and again, a huge existential question, of course, but all of these things, gravity and all of the elements that have come into play that have allowed us to exist in the way that we do, and all that exists, what's going on?
I was going to answer with a silly sort of like, oh, it was me.
Yeah,
but no, so this is all down to physics, right, at the end of the day. So if you take a cloud of material, right, and you allow it to collapse down under its own mutual gravitation, then the structures that we see are a natural consequence of the laws of physics. So over a period of time, right, and this is like the first key thing that's going to happen. The first key thing that's going to happen is, even if you have something that isn't rotating very, very much when it's all spread out, once it starts collapsing down under that gravity, it's going to start spinning up. The same way as an ice skater, they pull their arms in and they go faster and faster as they spin. The same thing is going to happen. That's called conservation of angular momentum. And so you'll start actually forming a disk of material. And then within that disk, you've got gravity as well. And so there's going to be regions that start collapsing within the disk. And that's essentially how you get planets, right? You've got the star in the middle of everything. And then going around it, you've got this flattened disk of stuff that's orbiting around that at the same time, this is a crazy thing, at the same time, it's collapsing down within certain regions to form planets, right? And so it's all a natural consequence of the laws of physics.
Yeah. And of course, all the elements that require distance from the sun, tilt of the planet, all of these things that lead to life.
Some of those things, I mean, so you mentioned the elements. I think that's a really important thing to mention. So depending upon how far away you are from the star, you'll have different elements, right? So, for example, closer into the star, you're going to have things that are going to survive being hot and things like that. So you'll have heavier elements, things like carbon, metals, and so on. And then as you get further out, you get the lighter elements. And then you get even further out, you'll get ices, right? And so this is called differentiation. And so that happens completely naturally and kind of determines what kind of planets you get forming at what distances from the star. So all of that is really pretty well understood.
Well, 902-405-6000. That is the way to reach us for the Science Files. If you'd like to get in on the fun, give us a call, 902-405-6000. You sent me some stories, but I saw this story last week, and I thought I would throw this at you.
Sure.
Unrehearsed, and I know that you can pivot, and I'm sure that you will.
Yeah.
CBC story says it's the time of year when scientific organizations take a look back at some of the most amazing new animals, plants, fungi, and other species they discovered in the past 12 months. So basically, talking about a new species of 2024. How common, I guess, is it? I suppose it's inevitable that we'll find new species on a planet of this vast, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the two most diverse things in terms of life, that would be bacteria and insects, I suppose. And there are an innumerable species of the two of those that have not been catalogued. I mean, I think the estimate for insects is something like 10% or something like that. Wow. There are all of these other species out there. I could be wrong, but no. But I seem to remember someone talking about this and saying, and the other place is if you think about things that are in the soil, that's also largely unexplored, right? Because we only really focus most of the time in terms of what's on top and the sort of like different variations of things throughout the globe and so on. There's a lot of possibility out there, right? And so that's an area in which I think that there is a lot to be discovered. But of course, there's a lot of stuff that's being done with DNA sequencing of bacteria and things like that. So we're now able to discover things about basically different species of bacteria very quickly, right? Which is a complete departure from, say, 20 or 30 years ago when people were looking at things under a microscope and things like that.
Yeah, I was going to say, what about things that are microscopic? Are they species as well?
Oh, yeah. I mean, so there are sort of like I'm not enough a biologist to tell you how individual bacteria are classified. My partner would be a good person to actually talk about this, but there are specific species of bacteria that are well understood, and then you get to things like viruses, and then you see what we've seen with COVID and how they followed the sort of different genetic traits of the different variants and so on over time. That is the most studied virus in history, which is interesting to think about.
What defines a species, I guess? What are the parameters that go into that?
As far as I can remember, again, I could be wrong. As far as I can remember, species are things that can actually reproduce with one another. Right. So it might actually be wrong using that terminology with bacteria, to be honest. So
yeah. Okay. 902-405-6000. And of course the oceans. Lord knows what's lays beneath the deep, right?
So especially the deep oceans, because those are really not significantly explored. But we have done a lot of research in terms of trying to understand samples of the ocean and then doing gene sequencing on those and seeing what's there and so on. So that was a major project. I wish I could remember the name of it. I can't, blanking on it, beginning of the year. But people have tried to sort of like look at the sort of large-scale sampling and see what variations come through those missions.
Okay, 902-405-6000. Give us a call, folks. Good open lines for you. Give us a buzz if you'd like to chat with Rob Thacker. Get in on the fun. It's the Science Files. The Science Files continues when we come back. All right, it's the Science Files with Rob Thacker. Did you wish Vanessa a belated happy birthday, by the way, Rob?
Oh, I did not.
Probably
happy birthday, Vanessa.
Belated
happy birthday.
Yesterday. I wasn't here yesterday, so she tried to sneak in her birthday without anybody knowing. But her mistake was that somehow she let it go on social media, in which Kelly then informed me of. So, failed plan, Vanessa.
Yeah, no, everyone knows now.
That's right. 902-405-6000. That is the way to reach us. Robin, hello.
Hi, how are you?
Well, you?
Very good. I have a question for Dr. Thacker.
Sure.
Great.
I just recently watched a great documentary on Netflix called The Trip to Infinity. And it had me thinking about you, Dr. Thacker, actually.
Okay.
About an hour long, and they go into all the conundrums of the concept of infinity.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And the big question that got me was about the apple in the box. And basically, they said if you take an apple and put it into a perfectly made box and let it sit there, and let it say after a month it'll decay.
Yeah.
After a year, it'll rot.
Yeah.
After 100 years, probably turn into some sort of dust. But after 1 billion years, you'll probably get a nuclear reaction going on in there where the particles break down and react with each other. And the energy of the apple will, move around in a way that it can only do in a box. And over time, millions and billions and billions of years, it'll basically turn into every type of object it can with the particles that it has.
Okay.
And eventually you can open the box and pull out an apple again.
Okay.
Well, the real question was, are we in the box?
So I actually I know why or where that argument comes from, but I don't agree with it. And I'll tell you why I don't agree with it. And that is that if you look at what's happening over time, so one of the things is the elements, there's going to be a small number of elements in the apple that are radioactive, not in any significant way. Radioactivity is completely natural, it happens, and so there will be some small amount of that apple that undergoes radioactive decay. It won't be a lot. But the point is, over time, what's called the entropy of that system is increasing. Right? And to get back to an apple again is such an incredibly unlikely event that it's not going to happen for all intents and purposes, right? Even if you waited an infinite amount of time, right? That you're just never going to be able to get the system back to the entropy it needs to form that apple. So I don't actually agree with that argument.
Oh, fair enough.
No.
It kind of made me think of kind of like string theory and type of if infinite possibilities are possible over an infinite amount of time, you're going to end up with, a radio show on a different planet as you being the host and Todd being the scientist.
Well, that'd be a bizarre world.
In some universe somewhere.
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with that kind of argument because I think that's actually different, right? So if your argument that you're making then is that the universe is infinite and in an infinite universe, then improbable things, as tiny probabilities they have within the allowed laws of whatever the system is, then they're going to happen. And I would tend to agree with that. But that's different from the physics of a contained, isolated box.
Oh, fair enough. Okay. Well, I would recommend the documentary to the listeners anyway. It's just an hour long, and it's fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for the call, Robin. Yeah. Take care.
Thanks, guys.
Okay, 902-405-6000. Carl, hello.
Oh, hey, guys. Good morning. There's a couple things. I read somewhere that the Japanese are actually building a tether to Mars. Is that? Have you heard anything about that?
Tether to Mars.
We talked about tethers in the past, right? And like one to go to the moon or whatever, and the pros and cons with it.
You mean a space elevator?
Yeah, right. And they're Japan is actually in the process of doing that. That's what I read, but I don't know if it was true or not. And there's a planet that was discovered in 24, a new one. It's closer than any of the others that we discovered. It's only 6 light years away. And what can you tell us about that?
Okay, so let me start with the space elevator. So the space elevator is this idea that you can literally put a string, right? It's not really a string, but it's got to be a very, very incredibly strong cable, in fact. So strong on the Earth, it's probably impossible. But on Mars, you build this tether from the surface all the way up to the top of the string, and you've got an object at the top that's literally in orbit. And so the string stays essentially where it is as this system goes around, right? And so that concept has been worked out. The physics of it is completely understood. And Mars is actually a good planet to do that on. You can do it on the moon too, but there's not a lot of interest on the moon, but there is quite a bit of interest in doing it on Mars. So if there's been a suggestion that a Japanese company wants to build something like this, I think it's conceivable that materials that are strong enough to do that already exist. The hard part is obviously getting the stuff to Mars in the first place, right? And so I don't know if they're suggesting that Elon Musk is going to be around to help on that. But I think generally a space elevator on Mars is a practical idea. And so people have talked about this quite a lot, as that's one of the reasons why Mars would be a good place to build things if you want to fly around the solar system, because you can get things off the surface with low energy. There's probably a fair amount of resources there, and that's one of the reasons people are talking about it. But personally, I think you have to take it with a pinch of salt, because we're probably not going to be on Mars for a few years yet.
Well, that's good. So now the pictures that I saw of that tether was truly amazing. And from what I read, they said that Japan is already building it. They're already starting to make this.
Well, so you could actually, if you really wanted to, you could actually say we're starting to build it already by doing prototyping on the Earth. I mean, that's not unreasonable, right? And in fact, that sometimes happens. People say, oh, we're building it already because you're building a prototype.
I see.
Yeah.
And what about that new planet that's closer than all the others, only 6 light years away? What can you tell us about that?
So the closest one I know about is Proxima Centauri, right? So that was discovered a few years ago. So I don't know that I've heard about an even closer one than that. I mean, I don't know where that would be.
A closer one. This was in 2024 they discovered this one, and it's supposed to be closer than any of the others, like only 6 light years away.
Well, Proxima Centauri is 4.25, so I don't quite know how. It may be the specific type of planet and whether it's in a habitable zone or something like that. That's possible.
Right, that's what it is. It seems like it.
Oh, I see. So this is nearest habitable planet. Okay. I mean, I'm blanking off the top of my head. I haven't heard about this, so I'd have to go and Google it to find out.
Okay. Well, thanks for your time, Dr.
No problem.
Rob, and have a good day, gentlemen.
Okay, pal. Take care. 902-405-6000. You're blanking. You've been saying that a lot today, Rob. Are you blanking in general or what?
I'm getting old. I will say that I've noticed the older I get that I used to have an incredible memory.
Yeah.
Right. When I was younger, I could literally have a conversation with you, walk 10 minutes down the road, and someone would say, oh, what are you talking to? And I could remember everything that we said in the conversation.
Wow.
Right. But I can't do that now. Right.
Well, I don't feel sorry for you. Probably a good thing that you're ejecting most of the conversations you have with me, I would say.
But here's the interesting question. Is that because my brain is getting slower?
No, you just don't care what I have to say.
Dude. Or is it because I've gone through like stresses and so on that I didn't have 20 years ago that's impairing my function? Right?
I don't know.
That's interesting.
Yeah, for sure. I think as we all age, we all suffer from that to a degree.
Yeah, I mean, cognitive decline is a part of aging.
There's
no debate about that. For some people, it's less significant, right?
Yeah.
And there's a reasonable amount of evidence that you can forestall it, but you can't, if you're genetically inclined, there's unfortunately not a lot you can do, right? But for most people, just staying active, keeping the pathways going does really help.
Okay, fair enough. So don't blank anymore. How's it sound?
I'll try.
No pressure. The Science Files continues when we come back.
Facts.
All right, the Science Files with Rob Thacker, St. Mary's University astrophysicist, 902-405-6000. Give us a call, folks. We've got some open lines for you if you'd like to chat with Rob Thacker. Science-related, of course, 902-405-6000. That is the way to reach us. Here is an email question. It's pretty succinct. Is Jupiter a failed star? That's from Joe.
Not really, right? So there's this space between the smaller stars and gas giant planets, right? And so in between that, there's kind of like a region in which those planets are big enough that they'll do a little tiny amount of the nuclear reactions, right? But it's not enough to actually sustain it in any significant way and become a star. Right, so is Jupiter big enough to be in that class? No, it's not. It's really not, and it doesn't. We don't know what the core interior of Jupiter is. It's probably carbon, probably. So it's not really a failed star in that sense. It's simply not big enough to be a failed star, right? It's just not in that sort of like brown dwarf class.
And of course, if it were, we wouldn't exist. Could Jupiter have dwarfed into a star, and our solar system would have been massively impacted, would it not have?
So that is an interesting question, because the question is then, actually, I think it could. I mean, even if Jupiter was a red dwarf star, I don't think its output would be significant enough to have any kind of baking effect of the Earth. Yeah, wow. I mean, if you get a really small red dwarf, I mean, it's not going to have that much energy output compared to the sun. And we're going to be closer to the sun than we are to that as well.
Yeah, okay. 902-405-6000, that is the way to reach us. Again, 902-405-6000. Give us a call, folks. While we await some calls, I wanted to talk to you about this story. And again, look, climate change and all of this continues to be, and of course, very political with the carbon tax. And we're not going to get into politics right now because that's a whole other Pandora's box, which I'm not going to open.
Because someone's been talking about Trudeau.
That's right. We don't need to get into that. Yeah. But this story that you sent from The Guardian, world endures a decade of deadly heat as 2024 caps hottest years on record. For those who say, and look, you hear naysayers all the time, or people who don't want to believe it, or whatever. I shouldn't say don't want to believe it. People will say on record is the key here, and that if you go back to 400, 500, whatever years ago, then you would see these patterns would repeat themselves. Sure. What's your response to that?
So this is one of the challenges, because people say, oh, the climate's always naturally changed. And I'll say, yes, it has, right? Yeah. But the issue is the sort of scale of the changes and the timing of the changes, right? And so if you look at CO2 and how that's changed in the atmosphere, it has changed so remarkably in the last 150 years that you can argue, well, we don't have a good enough proxy record to be able to go and see whether this ever happened in the past. And, that's a fair thing to say, but it's really unlikely to see that kind of change from geological.
What do you mean proxy record?
So there's no easy way of being able to measure the CO2 in the atmosphere hundreds of thousands of years ago. We can do it with ice cores up to, I think the limit for that is 500,000 years or something like that. But if you want to go back further than that, you've got to use something else that gives you a proxy for what the CO2 was, right? So that's just really difficult to do, right? And so there are a lot of sort of debates about how that's done and things like that. So it's quite difficult to reconstruct the past climate of the Earth in a way that anyone who was a real naysayer would be happy with. It's just hard to do, right? So you do it with these proxies, and it's all approximate. People try and get everything calibrated as best as you can, but it's really tough to do, right? Yeah. So for measuring in the ice cores, that's a little bit better because you can just analyze the air as it was, and you can do the analysis that way. So that works reasonably well. But it's difficult, right? And so then what you're saying is, well, how do you convince people that this is distinct? And the long and the short of it is, if someone is going to sit there and say, I want proof, you're never going to be able to give them proof. No. Right? Because it's not the kind of science where you get that proof. If you want sort of like really, really hard proof, the only science I'm going to give you that does that is mathematics, right? Because then if you've got a theorem, you've got a proof that proves the theorem, right? But even if you go to like physics, right, there's still experimental error within physics, right? And you can't wipe that away. You just get to sort of like very, very precise theories. But all of those precise theories have their own elements of error as well. And so in general, I always point out that there is no proof in science beyond mathematics. Everything relies upon probability, right? And so you have to fall back on probabilities to describe the likelihood, which is what the IPCC does, right? I can't remember the number, whether it's 95 or 96% now. Probability that all of the changes are caused by human beings, right? And most of the people who work in the field are completely convinced, right? And I'm not necessarily saying that those people are entirely without their own biases. They may have some biases.
Sure.
But the reality is when you look at the evidence, right, as it's compiled, it's very compelling. Now, there may be some issues with certain parts of it. That, again, is what happens with science, right? With any kind of scientific study, you will have certain things that don't work perfectly, right? That's the nature of having a very large understanding. It's like in cosmology. There are some things that we cannot explain to the level of precision that we would like, but we've got error bars on them, and so we say, well, it fits within reason.
Yeah. Well, there are things that are entirely measurable and tactile and real, and the depletion of resources like water and farmland and all of these things and habitat. These are real issues that you can't debate, you can't argue. They're happening. It's measurable, and yet people still are hesitant to want to do anything about these challenges.
Well, so where I actually think the real challenge is measuring geography, we can do that, right? No question about that. But that's, to a certain extent, an environmental question. What about the environmental damage are we doing and so on? And so particularly if you look at South America, right, there's a lot of data on what's happening with deforestation in South America and so on. But if you look at what's happening with the weather patterns, that's where there's like a real challenge, because even the people who work in the area will say, yeah, this is difficult to attribute the changes in weather patterns that we see to changes in the climate. Right, and that's very difficult. There's something called the Worldwide Weather Attribution Network that works on this now. But even they are very, very careful. And this is the thing that people never believe me when I say, but it's totally true. The vast majority of scientists are inherently conservative people who don't want to stick their neck out and make claims that turn out to be false. That's a truism of my many decades of working in science. And so my personal worry, and people sort of like skeptical go, oh, yeah, whatever. My personal worry is the people who work in climate have been so careful, they're probably underestimating the impact.
Well,
right? And I genuinely worry about that.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And so one of the things that we're seeing is like the discussion of the tipping point associated with the AMOC, the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Current. And whether that is coming towards some kind of turning point. Because if that happens, that's serious problems for the Northern Europe, right? But we just don't know, right? And we've got some data that's suggestive, other data that may not agree. And so we're looking at this and going, this is a sufficiently complex system that it's particularly difficult to make projections about what's going to happen.
Well, interesting.
Yeah.
902-405-6000. Todd, hello.
How you doing today?
Well, you...
Good. Dr. Rob might have touched on this before, but I just wanted to know his thoughts on sand batteries.
Sand batteries. Okay, yeah. So these are really gravity batteries, right? Or are you talking about heating it up?
The ones that store energy and then they take the energy out of the stored energy in the sand. I think it's Finland's doing it.
So I've heard two ways of doing it, though. So one of the ways is using sand to literally store heat energy, right? And so that's probably what you're talking about. And so the idea here is literally that the silica in the sand is a good energy storage medium. You actually keep it well insulated so the heat isn't leaking away. And then when you need that heat, you start actually, instead of heating it up, you start letting the system extract that heat energy away from the sand battery. I mean, it's an entirely reasonable system. I would say that there are a few more sophisticated alternatives out there right now. There are ones based upon carbon. And so these are coming to be sort of like alternatives to heat generation systems for creating steam and things like that. So overall, though, a sand battery is an entirely reasonable idea, and it's probably going to get applications in a few situations.
Probably because the cost of it's a lot better than carbon bomb.
Yeah, so
naturally,
you're right that it's very well. I mean, assuming they don't need a very specific form of sand, right? But certainly with the carbon storage systems I've seen, they are actually doing quite a lot of engineering to build those things.
Interesting. Well, thanks, Rob.
Okay.
Thanks for the call. 902-405-6000. That is the way to reach us for the Science Files. We'll get Rob Thacker to the top of the hour. Get some open lines for you as well. Give us a buzz. 902-405-6000. The Science Files continues when we come back. All right, the Science Files continues to the top of the hour. We've got some room for you as well. Get some open lines. Give us a buzz. Dr. Rob Thacker, astrophysicist at St. Mary's University, standing by, ready to engage with you. 902-405-6000. Mark sends this email along, Alpha Centauri, and it's not a question, but I think it's in response to something we were discussing earlier.
Yep.
Just to give you an idea of the size and distances of our universe, estimates it would take 150,000 years with our current technology to get Alpha Centauri.
Yep.
So, any follow-up to that, or?
Oh, it's a long way away. I mean, so if you put, so when I was growing up, I had this great poster on my bedroom wall that had a picture of the solar system on it, and of course, at that time, many years ago, I'm not going to say how old I am, it still had Pluto.
Yeah.
Right? And so it had, here's the sun to Pluto. This distance was, I don't know, probably a couple of feet or something like that. And it said the nearest star is 1.5 miles away on this scale.
Wow.
Right? And that really put into my head just how big the space between stars is. And so now whenever I do a public presentation about this, I take a basketball. I say, right, imagine this basketball is the sun, right? And I give a basketball to someone else, and I tell everyone in the room, tell that other person to go and stand in the place the nearest star to the sun is. And everyone goes, oh, go to the back of the room. And then someone will be like, oh, maybe we have to send them to Dartmouth or, I don't know, Sydney or whatever. And then you tell them that actually, no, if you really want to do this to scale, they've got to go to Victoria, BC.
Wow.
Right? Yeah. That brings into context just how incredibly far apart stars are, even though statistically, right, the sun and Alpha Centauri are fairly close together, right? So, or cosmologically, they're fairly close together. So it's really, it's called space for a reason. There's a lot of it.
Yeah. So when we see the Milky Way and these types of celestial wonders, it truly brings it into play. So the distance that we must be from the Milky Way.
So let's take the logical conclusion of this, right?
Yeah.
So when you see a galaxy, which is hundreds of millions to hundreds of billions of stars, depending upon the size of the galaxy, right? What you suddenly realize is, although you can see that sort of like glowing conglomeration of stars and so on, actually most of that system is empty space.
Yeah.
Right? And so when galaxies actually collide with one another, people often say, how likely is it that individual stars hit one another? It's incredibly unlikely, right? So you actually have these things colliding. You think, oh, wow, galaxies colliding, stars must be running into one another, and they're not, right? There's so much space between them.
Very interesting. Yeah. Okay, this story, I want to read a bit of it. You sent it along. Blue Origin to launch its first New Glenn rocket on January 10th. So Blue Origin is Jeff Bezos' brainchild, correct?
Yeah, yep. So this is competition between the billionaires, Musk and Bezos.
Yeah.
So Musk has SpaceX, Bezos has Blue Origin. So let's be pretty obvious that SpaceX is the one that's been garnering all of the headlines for a number of years now. But quietly in the background, Bezos' Blue Origin has been building the New Glenn rocket, and it's taken them a long time to get to this point. But it's a really interesting situation because they're going to do this first test, and they're hoping that they're going to nail it first time. We'll see whether they do. They want to bring it down, the booster back down, land it again. They've been doing that with their New Shepard rocket for a number of years, but that's much, much smaller than this New Glenn rocket. This New Glenn rocket is about, it can do about the third of the payload of the good old-fashioned Saturn V to low Earth orbit. So it can do 45 tons. So it's a really pretty big rocket, right? So we'll see how it goes. But if it's successful, then SpaceX has got some competition.
Okay, so when it comes to end game here, what's the end game for Bezos and this rocket?
They literally want a slice of the satellite launching market, right? Well, no, private launching now, right? So there's all of these different companies like There's Amazon wants their own Kuiper system up there as well. There's a lot of interest in having multiple constellations. I've spoken about the dangers associated with this before. Funnily enough, we had our McLennan lecturer come and talk about this as well. But that's where things are going, that there is an interest in having more and more launch vehicles to put more and more platforms up there. And so that's really what they're looking for.
Are there any other players besides SpaceX and Blue Origin?
Sure. I mean, there's United Launch Alliance, Boeing as well, things like that. So there are alternatives, but the main thing that sets Blue Origin and SpaceX apart is their cost to orbit is low because they're focused on reusability, right? And that is a significant change. So I think, what was it? Falcon 9 launches are about 40 million or something like that. And then I think Blue Origin is actually aiming for something around 60 million. Right, which is, for the size of the rocket, is actually pretty cheap.
Yeah, but the technology is far from perfected.
What, you mean the landing?
Yeah, the landing.
The boosters?
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty good,
Yeah.
right? So when you look at the success rate of landing Falcon 9 rockets now, I think they're well over 80% or something like that now. Yeah.
So Boeing, where's Boeing with all of this right now? Because they've had their challenges, right?
Yeah, no. I mean, they haven't moved ahead with the design of new launch vehicles in quite the same way, right? So they're still sort of like focused on. I mean, you've got Starliner and so on, but at the end of the day, Boeing is not taking the same approach that SpaceX. SpaceX has really been out there for a few years, and Blue Origin following closely behind. So those are the two, I would say those are the two big players in developing launch vehicles.
What's your thoughts on space tourism?
I'm not a huge fan, right? I'm especially not a fan of sort of like ideas like Virgin Galactic, right? Because that was not a particularly good rocket. And so I don't have a lot of sympathy for it, if I'm completely frank. I mean, if you got the money and so on, great. But then there's a lot of people in this world who have like $500,000 to spend on going to space. But it's not something that I think is contributing practically to the development of space. I mean, the question, I think, is going to be what's going to happen with space stations, right? Because quite legitimately, there are companies already working in that space thinking about what it would mean to have private space stations.
How far away do you think we are from that?
With SpaceX developing Starship, I think potentially not very far.
Really?
Like 5-10 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what's your fundamental concern with it? Is what challenges or what challenge does it pose long term, do you think?
It just doesn't serve much purpose, really. Right? That's my main concern with it, right?
And the resources that go into it that could be better used.
Yeah, I mean, you can't stop people, and someone's going to make a profit off it, no question about it. So you can't really stop it. But is it really serving any technology generation? No, it's not. Right? It's like Musk will argue that the real technology development that has to be done is going to Mars, which you can't really argue against because it's probably true, because that's a much, much harder problem than going to the moon. Right? So I can't get excited about it, to be honest.
Yeah.
Right? And then people say to me, do you want to go up? And I'm like, no, I'm not really bothered. Right? I'd actually much rather go on a really high altitude balloon flight. I think that would be an epic, slow, sort of monumental way to appreciate the majesty of our home.
Yeah, for sure. So as far as space, the time frame would be what in order to have space stations civilian based?
So literally, because Starship is such a revolution in launch capability, right? I mean, the bigger question is whether you're going to be able to convince people these things are safe, right? Because it's one thing to reach the level of safety that we have on jets. It's a whole other thing to reach that same level of safety with rocket engines, because rocket engines have huge temperature gradients. Things go wrong. And when things go wrong, it's pretty difficult to recover. Although, having said all of that, SpaceX is showing that with a lot of engines, if you lose a couple of them, you can still function.
Right. Okay. Rob Thacker, thanks for coming in. We appreciate it. The first of many in 2025. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks, everyone, for the great questions.
All right. That's Rob Thacker. That's the Science Files. And we do that each and every Tuesday from noon until 1. A reminder, of course, tomorrow we'll have Dr. John Gillis will be by for house calls, and we'll do that from 11 until 12. Then we'll open up the phone lines to take your general calls from noon until 1. I'd like to thank Vanessa Van Den Ness on the other side of the glass of the control boards. Doing a fine job as always. Thanks, everybody, so much for tuning in and listening. We appreciate it very much. We're back tomorrow at 10 o'clock. See you then.